Jonathan, you're an athlete supporter for the Women's Sports Trust. What made you decide to get involved?
The reason I got involved with the Women's Sports Trust is because I met one of the founders, very impressive woman who does martial arts. And you wouldn't have thought she had any issue with confidence and how she viewed herself. But she talked about her experience watching London 2012, and particularly all the women who were successful winning gold medals, and how it made her feel as a person, how she felt she stood taller. And I thought, there's clearly an issue here. If somebody like Tammy, her name was, would feel like that. And I was just very moved by her story and wanted to support it. I mean, I come from a sport, athletics, where I've always taken it for granted there's equality. You know, there's a men's 100 metres and there's a women's 100 metres. And if the women are running really quickly and it's an exciting race, it's equally as impressive as the men's 100 metres or the men's triple jump or the women's triple jump. But it's not like that in all sports, and I realised that. But this was the first time in that conversation when talking about the Women's Sports Trust and this launch that we're here at today, where it became a very personal issue in a sense, because I was faced with somebody for whom this had been something which had almost held her back as a person. So the idea of promoting women's sport, greater opportunities for women, is something that I want to get more involved with and to see a change. And part of the legacy of London 2012, I guess, which is something which I'm passionate about.
You mentioned the Olympics. Let's go with the stat from the Olympics, because of all of the medal haul, 36% were awarded to women, and of all the sponsorship, 0.5% was distributed to women and the rest was to men. I mean, what do you make of statistics like that?
Pretty damning, really. And again, I've heard statistics about column inches for men's sport as opposed to women's sport. I mean, again, I'm going to hold up athletics and say there's Jess Ennis, flying the flag and probably got more sponsorship than any male athlete in the British team, and maybe in not just athletics but across the board. And it's probably a bit of chicken and egg, and that's why organisations like the Women's Sports Trust are necessary. There's a big push, I think, from within political circles within the DCMS with the Secretary of State looking at women's sport, and not just participation in the sports themselves, but also administration. And if you've got more women and they're more successful, then you'll get more sponsorship, and the whole thing will snowball. And going back, through school sport as well, there's a real drop-off, isn't there, at a certain age. The talent's there, but then it's maybe lost because of peer pressure, whatever else, and it's not as cool to be a sportswoman as maybe it is to be a sportsman for the younger generation.
Let's talk generally as a sports fan instead of as an athlete that you were. When you watch sport on television, there's obviously a lot of sort of unequal billing in terms of prize money. Do you think that should be straight across the board?
I don't think it's as simple as saying there should be complete equality. I think you have to look at the product, perhaps, how hard the athletes work for it, the level of competition. But again, you go back to the sort of chicken and egg situation. If there's not so many women in sport, the depth of quality is not as great, then you might say it's slightly easier to win something, so should you get as much prize money? But that's, again, an issue about how many women would be attracted to sport in the first place. So I don't think there's a simple answer to just equality across the board. I think it's about it's a multifaceted issue, and one which has to be addressed at lots of different levels.
What do you make of role models in women's sport at the moment? Are there enough?
Are they?
Are there enough?
Are there enough role models in women's sports? Within my sport of athletics, it's not an issue, I don't think. Again, there is real equality there. If you look at something like football, it's very different. If you look at cricket, again, it's very different to athletics. And it's good to see the likes of the BBC getting behind the Women's Euros and showing that for the first time. Seeing a bit more profile for the women's cricket team, as opposed to the men always getting the headlines for winning or losing the Ashes and hopefully winning this summer. So it's improving, but again, I think there's more that can be done, and particularly through the media, through giving exposure and giving chances for the public to see women's sport. The thing you can have, it doesn't matter whether it's men or women taking part, captivating sport is captivating sport. And maybe sometimes there's a mindset which says that the public haven't got as much of an appetite for women's sport. Well, London 2012 showed that wasn't the case. It's every bit as exciting to see, the women's pair as the men's pair in rowing or whatever it might be, or Jess Ennis winning the heptathlon as whoever the American was, Ashton Eaton, who won the men's decathlon.
So you're obviously pointing towards coverage as well, which has been mentioned in the Commons this week. Harriet Harman mentioning the unequal balance between women's coverage on sports television and in papers and on radio in comparison to men's. The coverage itself, could that be an answer if that increases?
Coverage is really important for the development of women's sport, there's no question. And the reason newspapers focus on men's sport is because that's where all the names are. But then the names that people recognise are the ones that they see on the television for the most part, or hear about on the radio. So if you have greater coverage of women's sport, then you will create stars, and then the newspapers will report them. And as I say, I go back to my point, great sport is great sport. It doesn't matter whether it's, you know, two women striving for the line in 100 metres or two men striving for the line in 100 metres. A great race is a great race. And perhaps sometimes there has been an assumption, certainly within certain sports, that it's more exciting to see a man scoring a goal than a woman scoring a goal.
The Women's Sports Trust is aiming to affect many areas through its awards of grants, one being role models, increasing spectatorship and participation, so going back to schools as well and grassroots. What are you hoping within the next 12 months that the Women's Sports Trust could possibly achieve?
I mean, I think the biggest thing the Women's Sports Trust can do is just start to challenge the perceptions and assumptions about women's sport. I mean, I think there are organisations which do, you know, great work funding both, you know, young men and young women. There are, I think, initiatives to get, you know, more women involved in sports administration, which is important, bring a different perspective to it. But I think it is about perceptions and assumptions, and particularly within, I think, broadcast and the media generally, of the potential appeal of women's sport. I mean, look, and if you're looking at it from a business point of view, half of your consumers are women. So why wouldn't you, potentially, why wouldn't you explore that market? And in doing so, you know, make a business case for it, but equally give women more opportunity as a result.
Finally, I'm just going to ask you about, as a man and watching women's sport, do you enjoy it? Is it something that you've gone along and spectated in terms of bought a ticket? And
I mean, I don't often buy a ticket to go and watch sport, full stop. I mean, I spend a lot of time working on sport. And you know, if I'm sitting in an athletics meeting, or I can remember covering the Paralympics last summer for Channel 4, and I got, you know, you get captivated by a brilliant race. And thinking back to the Paralympics, Ellie Swimmins, I said it, Ellie Simmons. Ellie Swimmins.
Easy one to do.
So yeah, I just love watching good sport, quite simply. And it makes no difference, really, if it's a man or a woman that's taking part. It's about that competition, the kind of, you know, who's going to win it, is somebody going to choke, who's going to rise to the occasion, break a record, whatever it might be. I think we all get captivated by great sport, and it's irrelevant what gender the person who's doing it is.